Have you ever stared at your phone, heart pounding, hoping his name would pop up on the screen only to be met with silence? You replay the last conversation, wondering what you said wrong. You refresh the chat, again and again, trying to decode the gap between his last text and now. He used to respond in seconds. Now it's hours, sometimes days. And it's not just the time, it's the energy. The warmth is gone, he's gone cold. But here's what no one tells you. That kind of silence, it's not neutral. It's a weapon, a psychological strike that hits where it hurts. The most you'll need to be seen, to be validated, to matter. And when the person you care about suddenly withdraws, your brain doesn't register it as indifference. It registers it as danger. Rejection doesn't feel like discomfort. It feels like death. You think you're overreacting. But Carl Jung didn't think so. He believed that when someone pulls away, what actually gets triggered in you isn't just insecurity. It's the shadow, the unconscious part of yourself that still remembers the first time you were left behind, the first time love meant silence, the first time closeness turned into abandonment. So when he goes cold, you don't just miss him. You begin to lose yourself. You become anxious, hypervigilant. You send messages you later regret. You stalk his social media. You start to question your worth, your sanity. You begin to confuse silence with truth. You think, if he's quiet, then I must be the problem. And this is where you fall into the trap. Because what's really happening isn't about him. It's about the pattern. He's not the first. Maybe he just activated the original wound. And the worst part? You think doing more will fix it. You think if you explain more, love more, give more, he'll come back. But what if I told you that doing the opposite might just be the only thing that works? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Maybe this isn't fate. Maybe this is the moment your unconscious is trying to wake you up. The moment that silence is no longer just absence but a mirror. And what you see in that mirror, that's where the real story begins. Stay with me, because what you're about to understand won't just change the way you deal with him, it will change the way you understand yourself. Most people know Carl Jung as a brilliant thinker, a pioneer of depth psychology, a man who mapped the human soul with language few dared to use. But what they rarely talk about is the man behind the intellect. The man who, despite all his knowledge, once fell deeply, almost tragically, for someone who mirrored not his truth but his wounds. Jung, like anyone else, was not immune to the pull of unconscious attraction. In fact, his theory of projection, the idea that we fall in love with our own hidden parts reflected in others, was born not from detached study, but from lived experience. He once became captivated by a woman who stirred something ancient in him, not just desire but chaos, a magnetic pull that defied logic, blurred boundaries, and left him questioning his own identity. It wasn't love in the purest sense. It was possession, not of the body, but of the psyche. She wasn't just a person, she became a symbol, a living embodiment of what he called the animath, feminine aspect of a man's unconscious. She was everything he feared and desired, all at once. And because he had not yet fully confronted his shadow, her presence overwhelmed him. His longing wasn't for her, but for something inside himself he hadn't yet owned. That's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes when you crave someone, it's not about them. It's about a part of you screaming to be acknowledged. You see, Jung's mistake wasn't that he loved too much. It was that he mistook intensity for truth. He believed the fire meant something real, but the fire was a flare from within lit by unmet needs, old wounds, and unhealed stories. And that's exactly what's happening to you now. You think your connection to him is about who he is. You think it's his charm, his words, the way he used to hold you. But what if he's just playing the role your unconscious cast for him? What if his silence now isn't rejection but an invitation? A call to stop chasing someone out there and start listening to the ache inside. Carl Jung didn't escape the pain of heartbreak. He sat with it. He studied it. He allowed it to become his greatest teacher. And from that pain, he uncovered the blueprint of the soul. He realized that every time we fall for someone who leaves us cold, it's not a punishment. It's a reflection, a mirror showing us where we've abandoned ourselves. So maybe the story here is not that he's pulling away. Maybe the real story is that your unconscious finally has your attention. And just like Jung did, you now have a choice to either keep reacting, keep reaching, keep losing yourself in someone else's silence, or to pause, to turn inward, to ask not why he changed, but why this hurts so deeply. Because that question, that's where healing begins. And Carl Jung, he would tell you this: you are not broken, you are becoming. But becoming begins the moment you stop chasing what is running and start listening to what is rising. It often starts quietly. No fight, no explanation, just a shift. One day he's warm, attentive, texting you good morning, sending little jokes in the afternoon, making plans for the weekend. And the next, there's distance. He replies slower. He becomes vague. He pulls away. You tell yourself he's just busy, that it's temporary, that maybe you're imagining it, but you feel it. The temperature has changed, and it cuts deeper than you expect. Because it's not just his silence you're feeling, it's the emotional freefall that follows. You scramble to make sense of it. Was it something you said? Something you did? You search for signs. You ask your friends. You scroll through conversations looking for a clue. But here's the truth. His coldness is not necessarily a response to you. It's a response to himself. Carl Jung once explained that what we reject in ourselves, we project onto others. When a man suddenly becomes cold after being emotionally present, it often has little to do with your value and everything to do with the parts of him that were triggered when he began to feel close. You see, emotional intimacy isn't always comforting. For many people, especially those carrying unresolved wounds, closeness is dangerous. It activates fears they don't even know they have. The fear of losing control, the fear of being seen too clearly, the fear that if someone gets too close, they'll discover something unworthy beneath the surface. When he started caring about you, he began to lose his grip on the mask he carefully wears. The one that says, "I don't need anyone." That mask cracked when you got close, and instead of leaning into it, he retreated. It's not conscious. That's what makes it confusing. It looks like avoidance. It feels like indifference. But underneath, it's fear. Emotional intimacy triggered his unconscious defense system, the very one he developed to survive long before he met you. And yet, when this happens, your instinct is often to blame yourself, to do more, be more, prove your worth. But that reaction is not really about him. It's your own wound resurfacing, your own unconscious story saying, "If I can just be perfect, they won't leave." Carl Jung called this repetition compulsion, the tendency to reenact early wounds in hopes of finally resolving them. When someone goes cold, you don't just feel abandoned in the present. You feel abandoned by every person who ever made you feel invisible. This is why it hurts so much, because his silence doesn't live in the now. It echoes every silence you've ever endured. It presses on bruises you thought had healed, and the more you try to fix it, the more you betray yourself. You start to disappear. Your boundaries fade. Your sense of self becomes entangled with his response. You start measuring your worth by how often he texts back. You start shrinking, thinking that if you're smaller, quieter, more agreeable, maybe he'll return. But Jung warned of this trap. He said that when we seek healing externally, we lose the opportunity to integrate what's missing within. In other words, you're not meant to win him back. You're meant to face what his coldness awakened in you, because what's really happening is this: your unconscious is calling. Not for him, for you. For the part of you that keeps settling for breadcrumbs, that keeps trying to earn love, that keeps forgetting she is already whole. The reason he went cold might never make sense in a rational way. And that's because it doesn't belong to logic. It belongs to the unconscious and yours. His silence may not be cruel. It may just be the only way he knows how to protect himself. But your response to it, that's where the power is. Carl Jung taught that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So instead of asking why he changed, Ask why it hurts, why the silence makes you feel small, why you crave his validation more than your own peace. Because when you start to answer those questions, something shifts. You begin to reclaim your story. You begin to see that this isn't about fixing a relationship. It's about facing a mirror. He went cold. But maybe that coldness is the very space where your warmth is waiting to return, not to him, but to you. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment you stop chasing the one who left and start returning to the one who stayed. The part of you that's been waiting for your own love all along. You think you're loving him, but what if you're really fighting a war inside yourself? Love should feel like connection, safety, a place to rest. But for you, it feels like tension, like walking on a wire, hoping not to fall. Every message from him feels like a lifeline. Every silence feels like punishment. You wait, you hope, you overthink, and all the while, your nervous system is screaming not for him but for regulation, for peace. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we disown, repress, or deny. He believed that until we bring the shadow to light, we live as its prisoner. What if your love is not love at all, but the shadow in disguise? A longing not for partnership, but for permission. Permission to exist, to be wanted, to matter. What if this entire relationship is a mirror, not showing you who he is, but who you are when you feel unseen? You say you're afraid of losing him, but if you're honest, what you fear more is being left with yourself. The silence inside, the voice that whispers, "You're not enough." So instead of sitting with that voice, you chase, you try harder, you call it love. But love doesn't demand that you abandon yourself. This is where the real conflict begins. Not between you and him, between you and you. There is a part of you that knows you deserve better. That part is quiet, tired, often ignored. Then there's the other part, the louder one. The part shaped by old wounds. The child who learned that love must be earned. That attention is the reward for self-sacrifice. That staying silent, pleasing others, not asking for too much, that's the only way to be chosen. Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will return as fate, over and over, until we finally listen. And so here you are again, loving someone who cannot love you back in the way you need, trying to prove your worth through their approval, mistaking anxiety for passion, calling survival a relationship. But this is not your fault. It is your pattern, and patterns are not punishments. They are invitations. An invitation to see that you are reenacting something older than this moment. A memory, a wound, a belief that says, "I am not enough unless someone wants me." You are not in a relationship. You are in a reenactment, and the battlefield is within. So you fight for his attention. You fight for his affection. You fight to be chosen. But every time you fight for him, you abandon you. You bend. You break. You become smaller, softer, more agreeable. You say yes when you mean no. You tolerate inconsistency. You tell yourself this is strength, that this is what it means to love unconditionally. But unconditional love does not mean unconditional self-abandonment. Carl Jung wrote that we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. Maybe he is one of those disguises. A messenger dressed as a lover, someone sent not to complete you, but to confront you, to show you what still hurts, what still hides, what still hopes. This isn't about him anymore. It never really was. He is just the trigger, the doorway, the spark that lit the flame. But the fire, that was already there. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you keep burning to keep someone else warm? Or will you finally step into the heat and face what you've been avoiding all along? The conflict you feel is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a signal that something is ready to be healed. So ask yourself, who are you when you're not performing for love? Who are you when you stop shrinking? When you stop trying to be chosen? Because love that costs you your peace is not love. Love that asks you to abandon your truth is not love. And love that keeps you fighting yourself is not love. It is trauma, dressed in the costume of chemistry. You are not here to earn affection. You are here to remember your worth. And that begins the moment you stop chasing his validation and start meeting your own gaze in the mirror. Not with judgment, but with recognition. This is the turning point, the place where the story shifts. The moment you realize that the war was never about him, it was about the part of you waiting to be chosen by you. There comes a moment in every story when the chase becomes exhaustion, when the calling, explaining, trying, and overthinking no longer feel like devotion but self-betrayal. That moment is not the end. It is the beginning. Carl Jung called it individuation. The process of becoming whole, not perfect, not loved, not chosen, whole. It begins when you stop reaching outward and start turning inward. When you stop asking, "Why did he leave?" and begin to ask, "Why do I keep leaving myself?" Individuation is not glamorous. It doesn't look like power moves or silent revenge. It looks like sitting in your room with a shattered sense of identity, and instead of distracting yourself with another text or another hope, you sit still. You feel the ache. You face the mirror. You meet the part of you that has been waiting. Not for him, for you. You begin to notice the patterns. How you abandon your needs the moment someone threatens to leave. How you lower your voice when you're afraid of being too much. How you rewrite yourself to fit into someone else's story. And in that noticing, something sacred happens. You stop blaming him. You start reclaiming you. Jung believed that the path to selfhood required a descent into the shadow, into the forgotten, into the rejected parts of yourself. That's why this pain feels like death, because it is. The death of the false self. The version of you who thought love had to be earned. The one who confused sacrifice with worthiness. When you no longer perform, chase, or beg, you meet what Jung called the true self. The part of you untouched by rejection. The part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. It does not scream. It does not chase. It waits, patiently, beneath the noise. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you forgot, before you gave your power away, before you shaped yourself into someone likable, lovable, acceptable. It's about returning, and to return, you must stop. Stop texting him to reattach what is meant to fall apart. Stop scrolling through his posts looking for crumbs of care. Stop checking if he watched your story as proof of his presence, because none of those actions are about love. They are about fear. Fear of being with yourself. Fear of facing the loneliness that his silence mirrors back to you. But that loneliness is not emptiness. It is space. Space for your soul to breathe. Space for your truth to rise. Space for your shadow to step forward and say, "This is where I hurt. This is where I was left. This is where I need you." Because individuation is not about independence. It's about integration. Integrating the parts of you you once rejected. The neediness, the sensitivity, the longing, the fear, the parts you thought made you unlovable. Those parts are not flaws. They are invitations. Invitations to become human again. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no one around, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most. Maybe that is what this is. Not just heartbreak, but a heartbreak that reveals what has always mattered to you. Connection, belonging, safety. But here's the truth you have been avoiding. Those things cannot come from someone who disappears when it gets hard. They cannot be built on silence, confusion, or breadcrumbs. They must begin within. So you begin, not with a new partner, not with a new distraction, but with you. With taking your phone off the pillow and placing it face down. With choosing not to send the message that says, "Are you okay?" when what you really mean is, "Do I still matter?" You begin by allowing the question to remain unanswered. Not because you no longer care, but because your peace matters more than his reply. Individuation is a choice, a daily one. To no longer betray yourself for temporary attention. To no longer lose sleep over someone who sleeps just fine without you. To choose wholeness over chasing, stillness over struggle. And in that space, something shifts. You start to see clearly. You remember that the one who can leave is not the one who defines your worth. You remember that silence is not absent seat, is a mirror, and what you see reflected is not rejection, it is revelation. The real story was never about whether he would come back. It was about whether you would return to yourself, not the self who needs to be chosen, the self who chooses. Carl Jung would tell you that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of yourself, but by embracing them. So when the world says, move on, and your heart says, not yet, you sit with that. Not to stay stuck, but to stay real. This is the moment, the quiet rebirth, the shift, when the story changes from, I need him to feel whole, to I am whole, even without him. And from that place, everything begins. It always feels backward at first. You think silence will make you invisible, that stepping away will erase your presence, that if you stop reaching out, stop reacting, stop trying to make him see you, he will forget you. But the truth is, it's not your presence that echoes in his unconscious. It's your absence. When you go quiet not as a tactic, but from a place of clarity, you shift the entire dynamic. Because in that silence, you stop feeding the pattern, the loop of pursuit and withdrawal, the cycle of anxiety and relief. You become the space where the pattern collapses, and in that collapse, something unexpected happens. He begins to feel. Carl Jung believed that what we suppress in the unconscious does not disappear. It waits, it festers, it influences, and eventually it returns, often wearing the face of someone we thought we left behind. You see, when you were chasing, he was protected, not by love, but by his own defenses. Your energy filled the space. Your questions gave him control. Your need allowed him to remain detached. But when that energy stops, when the noise quiet, she is left with the very thing he was trying to avoid, himself. At first, he might not notice. It might even feel like relief. No more pressure, no more expectation, no more reflection of his own discomfort. But as the days pass, your silence becomes louder than your words ever were. Because now, there is space. Space for your absence to settle in his body. Space for the unconscious to rise. And what rises is not logic. It is memory, emotion, the echo of something once comforting, now missing. He doesn't remember your last text. He remembers how he felt when he read it. He doesn't replay your voice. He relives the safety it gave him. And slowly, the very defenses that made him retreat begin to shake. Not because you begged, but because you didn't. There is something powerful about a woman who can walk away without slamming the door. Something disarming about someone who stops talking but keeps existing gracefully, quietly, unapologetically. It disrupts the script. He expected tears. He expected blame. He expected you to try and fix what he broke. But when you didn't, his unconscious was left with a question it could not ignore. Why is she gone? Not just physically, energetically, emotionally. Why did the mirror go dark? Carl Jung taught that the animath, feminine aspect of a man's unconsciousness projected onto women he connects with deeply. When you were near, he projected. When you left, he felt the disconnection not just from you, but from that anima, that projection, that reflection of his own inner world. And now, it is gone. This is when the unconscious stirs. Not when you speak, but when you disappear. He might scroll through your old photos. He might open your messages, stare at them, then close the app. He might dream of you, not always clearly, sometimes in symbols, a song, a place, a scent, a memory. His conscious mind might dismiss it, but his unconscious remembers, and it starts to whisper. It whispers not of loss, but of longing. Not for control, but for connection. Not for ownership, but for understanding. And in that whisper, something shifts. He starts to wonder not just where you went, but who you became in your silence. That is the twist. That is the loop. When you stop chasing, you don't just become invisible. You become magnetic, not because of strategy, but because of energy. Your energy, once scattered, has returned home to you. And now, instead of trying to be seen, you are seeing yourself. And people feel that, even from miles away, even through silence. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Maybe that is what your silence means. Not withdrawal, but return. Not punishment, but presence. Not manipulation, but transformation. And as he begins to sense this shift, whether he reaches out or not becomes irrelevant, because this was never about getting him back. It was about getting you back. Still, if he does return, and someday it will not be to the same version of you he once knew, it will be to someone new, someone grounded, someone who no longer needs his attention to feel real, someone who has turned silence into strength and distance into depth. That is the power of individuation. That is the power of the twist. You thought silence would end the story, but it was only the beginning. So now you know. It was never just about him going cold. It was about what that silence brought to the surface. The patterns, the shadows, the ache that had no name until now. You've walked through the pain. You've seen how easy it is to mistake chasing for connection, how loud the need becomes when someone pulls away, and how often we confuse being wanted with being worthy. But here's the most important part. You don't have to stay in that pattern. You can choose differently. You can choose stillness over struggle, boundaries over begging, self-respect over self-abandonment. Not to win some imaginary prize, not to manipulate, not to make anyone miss you, but because you finally realize that your peace is too valuable to gamble for temporary validation. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." Maybe this is your awakening. Maybe this pain, this distance, this silence was never a punishment. Maybe it was a portal, a chance to return to yourself in the most honest, unshakable way. So now I ask you, what will you do next? Will you send the message just to see if he still cares? Or will you sit with the discomfort just a little longer and let it shape you instead of shatter you? Will you repeat the pattern, or will you rewrite the story? Take a moment, breathe, ask yourself, what part of me have I been trying to fill through someone else? And when you're ready, when the silence no longer scares you, but strengthens you, speak from that place. Until then, let this be your mirror. And if this story touched something in you, something unspoken, something you've never been able to explain, tell me. Share it. Comment below. Let me know the line that stayed with you. You are not alone in this. And the next chapter starts with a choice, yours.